The wind cut through the Chicago streets like frozen blades, and Camille Johnson pressed her body closer to the brick wall, trying to shield her 3-month-old son from the brutal cold. Isaiah's lips had taken on a blue tint that terrified her. She'd wrapped him in every piece of clothing she owned, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough anymore. Her fingers were numb as she held him against her chest, her own thin coat doing little to protect either of them. The doorway of the closed bookstore offered minimal shelter, but it was better than the open sidewalk where the wind whipped snow into small tornadoes. Camille's beautiful dark skin was ashen from the cold, her natural curls hidden under a threadbare knit cap that had seen better days. She hummed softly to Isaiah, though her voice cracked from dehydration and exhaustion. They'd been on the streets for 2 months now. 2 months since her landlord had changed the locks while she was at the food bank. 2 months since she'd held a steady job. 2 months of watching her savings disappear on temporary motel rooms until there was nothing left. Isaiah made a weak sound and Camille's heart clenched with fear. It was getting worse. His tiny body shivered less now, which she knew from her frantic internet searches at the library meant hypothermia was setting in. Tears froze on her cheeks as she rocked him gently, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. "Please baby, please hold on," she whispered. "Mama's going to figure this out." But she didn't know how. The shelters were full. Every single one. Christmas Eve meant families were prioritized, and single mothers with infants were somehow always at the bottom of the list. She tried 3 different places today, walking miles between them, only to be turned away each time. The street was mostly empty now, people safe in their warm homes, preparing for tomorrow's celebrations. Camille tried not to think about last Christmas, when she'd been 5 months pregnant, excitedly decorating her small apartment, dreaming of her future with Isaiah's father. That future had evaporated when he'd walked out 2 weeks after Isaiah was born, taking her rent money with him. Isaiah's breathing seemed shallow. Camille's panic rose in her throat. She needed help. She needed a miracle. "Daddy, look." A child's voice cut through the wind. "That lady has a baby." Camille looked up to see a small girl pointing at her. The child wore a beautiful red velvet coat with white fur trim, her blonde hair in perfect braids. Next to her stood a tall man in an expensive charcoal gray overcoat, carrying shopping bags from high-end stores. "Sophie, don't point," the man said gently, but his eyes had found Camille and Isaiah, and something shifted in his expression. "But Daddy, the baby," Sophie said, pulling her father's hand. "We have to check." The man hesitated for only a moment before walking over, his daughter's small hand firmly in his. As they got closer, Camille could see concern replacing the initial discomfort on his handsome face. He was probably in his mid-30s, with kind hazel eyes and dark hair touched with gray at the temples. "Are you all right?" he asked, crouching down to her level despite his expensive suit. Camille wanted to lie, wanted to say she was fine, but Isaiah made another weak sound, and the words died in her throat. "He's so cold," she heard herself whisper. "I can't. I don't know what to do." Sophie broke free from her father's hand and came closer, peering at Isaiah with wide blue eyes. "Daddy, her baby is freezing." The little girl's voice was urgent, almost scolding. "His lips are blue. We learned about that in my safety class. He needs to be warm right now." The man looked from his daughter to Isaiah, and Camille saw the exact moment he made his decision. He set down his shopping bags and shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around Camille's shoulders. The warmth from his body still clung to the fabric and it felt like heaven. "I'm Julian Bradford," he said quickly. "There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. Can you walk?" Camille nodded, though her legs felt like rubber. Julian picked up his shopping bags in one hand and offered her his other arm for support. Sophie took her father's free hand, looking back at Camille with an expression far too serious for such a young child. "It's okay," Sophie said. "My daddy helps people. He's really good at it." They made their way down the street, Julian's strong arms supporting Camille when she stumbled. She couldn't believe this was happening. People walked past homeless mothers every day. She knew because she'd watched them do it, had seen the way eyes would slide away, refusing to acknowledge her existence. But this man, this little girl, they'd stopped. The hotel lobby was a blast of warm air that made Camille's frozen skin burn. She must have looked awful, must have smelled worse, but Julian didn't seem to notice or care. He guided her to a plush chair in the lobby and spoke rapidly to the woman at the front desk. "I need your best suite. Immediately." The desk clerk's eyes flickered to Camille with barely concealed judgment, but Julian's tone left no room for discussion. Within minutes, they had a key card and Julian was ushering them toward the elevator. Sophie stayed close to Camille, chattering away. Do you like hot chocolate? They have really good hot chocolate here. My daddy brings me sometimes after ice skating. What's your baby's name? Isaiah, Camille managed to say, her voice hoarse. That's a nice name, Sophie said approvingly. I'm Sophie. I'm 5 3/4. The suite was bigger than the apartment Camille had lost. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Chicago skyline twinkling with Christmas lights. A massive tree stood in one corner, already decorated and lit. It felt like stepping into a dream. The bathroom is through there, Julian said, pointing. There should be robes. Get warm, both of you. I'm ordering food and calling a doctor. I can't pay. Camille started to say, but Julian held up a hand. This isn't about payment. This is about making sure Isaiah is safe. Will you let me help? Camille looked at this stranger who'd brought them in from the cold without hesitation, who'd given his own coat, who was now offering so much more. Every instinct told her to accept, to grab this lifeline with both hands. Yes, she whispered. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you believe one moment of kindness can change everything? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to hear what happens next, and comment below about a time someone's compassion made a difference in your life. The hot shower was the first one Camille had experienced in weeks, and she cried under the stream of water, careful to keep Isaiah's face away from the spray as she gently warmed his tiny body. His color was returning, his breathing steadier. She sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. When she emerged in the plush hotel robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, Julian had transformed the suite. Food covered the dining table, everything from soup to sandwiches to fruit. Sophie sat on the floor, carefully arranging stuffed animals she must have retrieved from their shopping bags. For Isaiah, Sophie explained. When he's bigger. A knock at the door announced the doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patricia Chin who examined Isaiah thoroughly. He's going to be fine, she finally said, and Camille felt her knees go weak with relief. You got him warm just in time. Another hour out there. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Dr. Chin left supplies and instructions, refusing payment when Camille insisted she'd find a way to pay her back someday. Just pay it forward, the doctor said with a warm smile. As night deepened, Camille sat on the enormous bed, Isaiah sleeping peacefully beside her, his color healthy and normal now. Julian had taken Sophie back to their own home but had promised to return in the morning. The suite was prepaid for a week, he'd said. Take the time to rest and figure things out. Camille looked around at the beautiful room, at her sleeping son, safe and warm, and for the first time in months she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Camille woke to sunlight streaming through the suite's windows and a moment of panic before she remembered where she was. Isaiah was still asleep beside her, his breathing even and peaceful. She checked him compulsively, touching his forehead, watching the rise and fall of his tiny chest. He was warm. He was safe. The digital clock on the nightstand read 9:47 a.m. Camille couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past dawn. On the streets, you had to be alert, had to move before business owners shooed you away from their doorsteps. But here, in this beautiful room high above the city, she'd slept for 10 solid hours. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. She wrapped the robe tighter around herself and padded to the door, checking the peephole. Julian stood in the hallway, Sophie beside him, both carrying shopping bags. Camille opened the door, suddenly self-conscious. Her natural hair was a mess, she wore nothing but the robe and she probably looked exhausted despite the sleep. Good morning, Julian said with a gentle smile. May we come in? Of course, Camille stepped aside. I'm sorry, I just woke up. I should be dressed, I should. You should be resting, Julian interrupted kindly. That's exactly what you should be doing. Sophie bounded past, heading straight for the bed where Isaiah was starting to stir. Can I look at him? She asked, turning to Camille with polite urgency. Yes, but gently, Camille said, moving quickly to the bedside. Sophie leaned over the bed, peering at Isaiah with fascination. He's so tiny. Was I that tiny once, Daddy? You were, Julian said, his voice carrying a note of memory. Maybe even smaller. Isaiah opened his eyes, focusing on Sophie's face hovering above him. Instead of crying, he made a small cooing sound, and Sophie's face lit up with delight. He likes me, she whispered. Camille felt tears prick her eyes at the innocence of it, at the simple kindness of this child who saw another human in need and responded with pure compassion. Julian set his shopping bags on the table. We brought some things. Clothes for you, everything Isaiah might need, and breakfast. I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I got a bit of everything. You didn't have to. Camille started, but Julian held up a hand, the same gesture from last night. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. Will you let me help? There was again that question. Camille realized it was important to him, this asking rather than just doing. He was giving her agency, respecting her dignity even as he offered charity. Yes, she said again, and it came easier this time. Thank you, Julian. Over breakfast, sitting at the suite's elegant dining table while Sophie played nearby with Isaiah on a blanket, Camille's story spilled out. She hadn't meant to share everything, but Julian's quiet attention, his non-judgmental presence, made the words flow. She told him about growing up in foster care, about working her way through community college while taking graphic design courses online, about meeting Isaiah's father at a coffee shop, believing him when he said he wanted to build a life together, about the small but perfect apartment she'd rented, the job she'd loved at a marketing firm. I was good at it, she said, staring at her coffee. Design work, I mean. I was really good. I can tell, Julian said. It takes creativity and determination to survive what you've survived. Camille continued, her voice growing softer. When she'd gotten pregnant, everything had been fine at first. But then the morning sickness became severe and she'd missed too much work. The small firm couldn't afford to keep someone who was absent so often. They'd let her go kindly with apologies and a small severance. Isaiah's father, Marcus. No, she stopped herself. His name was Jerome. Jerome had promised it would be okay, that they'd manage. But when the baby actually arrived, when the reality of sleepless nights and constant needs set in, Jerome had panicked. He'd taken money from her emergency fund and disappeared. I tried everything, Camille said, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug. Applied for assistance, for housing vouchers, for jobs. But it takes time and I had none. The landlord wouldn't work with me on rent. One day I came back from trying to get formula from a food bank and my locks were changed. Everything I owned was inside. What about family? Julian asked gently. Camille's laugh was bitter. I have a sister, Courtney. She's 2 years older. When I called her, when I begged her for help, she said I'd made my choices and I had to live with them. She'd never liked Jerome and I guess she thought I deserved what I got. Sophie had stopped playing and was listening, her young face troubled. She came over and climbed onto Camille's lap without asking, wrapping her small arms around her. That was mean, Sophie said firmly. Sisters should help each other. Camille hugged the little girl, overwhelmed by the simple comfort. Yes, they should. Julian was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally he spoke. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast and brutal, and it left Sophie and me trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly made no sense. I'm so sorry, Camille whispered. People helped us, Julian continued. Family, friends, even strangers. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, moved into the estate to help with Sophie. My business partner covered for me when I couldn't focus. A grief counselor at the hospital reduced her rates to almost nothing because she said she just wanted to help. Without those people, I don't know where we'd be. He looked directly at Camille. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe Sophie and I found you last night because you needed help, and we needed to remember what giving help feels like. So please let me do this. Let me help you get back on your feet. Camille wanted to argue, wanted to say she couldn't accept so much, but looking at Julian's sincere face and Sophie's trusting smile, she realized that refusing wasn't just about her pride. It was about letting them give something they needed to give. Okay, she said. I'll accept your help. But I want to pay it back someday in whatever way I can. Deal? Julian said with a smile. Now let's talk about next steps. This suite is yours for the week, but we need to think longer term. What he proposed was overwhelming. He owned an estate in Lake Forest just outside the city. On the property was a guest house, currently empty. Camille and Isaiah could stay there rent-free while she got back on her feet. He'd help her replace her ID and other documents, which she'd need to apply for jobs or assistance. If she wanted, he could connect her with resources to restart her design career. It's too much, Camille said, even as her heart leaped at the possibilities. It's a guest house that sits empty, Julian countered. You'd actually be doing me a favor. Mrs. Kim worries about pipes freezing in there during winter. Sophie nodded seriously. She does worry about that. She talks about it all the time. Camille looked at Isaiah, sleeping peacefully on his blanket, healthy and safe. She thought about the doorway where they'd been less than 24 hours ago, about Isaiah's blue lips and shallow breathing. She thought about Julian's question. Will you let me help? Yes, she said for the third time, and this time, it felt like opening a door to a future she'd thought was lost forever. Yes, I'll let you help. Thank you. Julian's smile was warm and genuine. Good. We'll move you in tomorrow, give you time to settle. Merry Christmas, Camille. Merry Christmas, she whispered back, and for the first time since Jerome had left, since she'd lost everything, she actually meant it. The Bradford estate was something out of a magazine. As Julian's car wound up the long driveway, Camille pressed her face to the window, unable to believe what she was seeing. The main house was a sprawling stone mansion with tall windows that glowed warmly in the winter afternoon. Gardens, now dormant for winter, stretched out on either side. And there, separate from the main house but equally beautiful, stood the guest house. It's so big, Camille breathed, holding Isaiah close. It's 6 rooms, Sophie said from her car seat beside Camille. There's a kitchen and a living room and 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Mrs. Kim says it's bigger than her first house. Julian pulled up in front of the guest house and turned to look at Camille. I know it's overwhelming. Take your time getting comfortable. There's no pressure, no timeline. This is a safe place for you and Isaiah to heal and plan. Camille nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The inside of the guest house was even better than the outside. Hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon light. The furniture was simple but elegant, in shades of cream and soft blue. The kitchen had modern appliances that looked barely used. And best of all, it was warm. Beautifully, wonderfully warm. The main bedroom is upstairs, Julian explained, carrying in the bags of supplies they'd accumulated over the past 2 days. The second bedroom could be Isaiah's nursery, though he's probably too young to be separate from you right now. Sophie tugged on Camille's hand. I'll show you. She led Camille up the stairs, chattering about which room was which. The main bedroom took Camille's breath away. A queen-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in soft green linens. Large windows overlooked the snowy gardens. There was even an attached bathroom with a deep soaking tub. Do you like it? Sophie asked anxiously. I love it, Camille said honestly. It's beautiful. They spent the afternoon settling in. Julian had thought of everything. The fridge and pantry were stocked with food. The closets held linens and towels. There was even a washer and dryer in a small utility room off the kitchen. For someone who'd been doing laundry in gas station sinks for months, it felt like luxury beyond measure. Mrs. Kim arrived around 4, a small, energetic Korean woman in her 60s who took one look at Camille and Isaiah and immediately went into action. Too skinny, she declared, though her tone was kind. Both of you. I'm making dinner. Real food. You don't have to, Camille started, but Mrs. Kim waved her off. Of course I have to. You're staying here now. Your family. Family eats well. Julian caught Camille's eye and smiled. Don't bother arguing. I learned years ago that Mrs. Kim always wins. Smart man, Mrs. Kim said approvingly, already pulling ingredients from the fridge. Dinner was a revelation. Mrs. Kim had prepared a traditional Korean meal with bulgogi, rice, and several side dishes. They ate at the guest house's small dining table, Sophie sitting next to Camille, Julian across from them, Mrs. Kim bustling between the guest house and the main house. This is amazing, Camille said, meaning both the food and the entire surreal situation. Mrs. Kim's the best cook in Illinois, Sophie said seriously. Maybe in the whole country. Flatterer, Mrs. Kim said, but she looked pleased. She sat down with them, fixing Camille with a knowing look. You've had a hard time. It wasn't a question, so Camille just nodded. Hard times don't last forever, Mrs. Kim continued. Hard times teach us what we're made of. You're strong. I can see it. You survived to protect your baby. That's everything. Tears welled up in Camille's eyes. I just did what any mother would do. No, Mrs. Kim said firmly. You did what a good mother does. Not every mother is good. You are. After dinner, Julian and Sophie returned to the main house, and for the first time, Camille was alone with Isaiah in their new temporary home. She walked through each room slowly, touching furniture, looking out windows, trying to convince herself this was real. In the main bedroom, she laid Isaiah on the bed and just watched him. He'd gained a little weight already, his cheeks filling out, his color healthy and vibrant. The terror of that night in the doorway felt distant now, like a nightmare she'd woken from. We're going to be okay, she whispered to him. We're really going to be okay. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, Julian stood there with a basket. Mrs. Kim insisted, he said, holding it out. Baby supplies. Also, she says if you need anything at all, day or night, call the main house. Someone's always up. Camille took the basket, peeking inside to see diapers, wipes, baby wash, and a dozen other necessities. Julian, I don't know how to thank you. All of this, It's what should have happened the moment you needed help, Julian interrupted gently. You shouldn't have been in that doorway. The fact that the systems that should have caught you failed, that's what's wrong. This is just making it right. But why? Camille asked, the question she'd been holding back finally emerging. Why so much? Julian was quiet for a moment, looking out at the snowy landscape. When my wife died, I was drowning. I had money, I had resources, I had every advantage, and I was still drowning. Sophie was barely 2 years old. I didn't know how to be a single parent. I didn't know how to exist without my partner. He turned back to Camille. People helped me. They showed me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. They showed me that accepting kindness isn't shameful, it's human. Sophie and I found you that night because we needed a reminder of what really matters. Money, success, business deals, they're all fine. But they mean nothing if we forget to see each other. If we forget to help. Camille understood then. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was connection. This was two broken people extending hands to two other broken people, creating something whole from the fragments. I won't forget this, she said. Ever. Good, Julian smiled. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we start working on getting your life back. Mrs. Kim's already making calls about replacing your documents. After he left, Camille stood at the window watching lights glow in the main house. She thought about the sister who'd refused to help, about Jerome who'd abandoned them, about all the people who'd looked away when she'd asked for assistance. And then she thought about Julian, about Sophie, about Mrs. Kim. About the doctor who'd come immediately. About the hotel clerk who'd stopped judging once she'd seen Julian's determination to help. About the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the good people outnumbered the bad ones. Maybe the helpers outnumbered the harmers. You just had to stay alive long enough to find them. She picked up Isaiah, holding him close. Tomorrow starts our new life, baby. Tomorrow Mama gets back up. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. True to his word, Julian had immediately started helping Camille rebuild her documentation. On the first Monday after Christmas, they'd driven to the DMV for a replacement ID. The process should have taken weeks, but Julian knew someone who knew someone, and suddenly Camille had an expedited appointment. I don't want you to think I'm pulling strings inappropriately, Julian had explained as they waited. But I do have connections and I don't see why we shouldn't use them to help someone who deserves help. Sophie had come along, insisting she was part of the team. She'd entertained Isaiah in the waiting room, making funny faces that had the baby giggling, a sound that made Camille's heart soar every time she heard it. With an ID came the ability to apply for assistance programs, to open a bank account, to exist in the official world again. Julian had connected her with a social worker named Beth Rodriguez, who'd helped navigate the maze of paperwork without judgment. You'd be surprised how many people end up in your situation, Beth had said during one of their meetings at the guest house. The safety net has holes. Big ones. But we're going to get you through this. True to her word, Beth had secured food assistance and healthcare for Isaiah. Small steps but crucial ones. Mrs. Kim had taken Camille under her wing completely. Every morning she'd appear at the guest house with breakfast and company. She'd hold Isaiah while Camille showered. She'd share stories about her own immigration to America 40 years ago, about the kindness of strangers that had helped her build a life. Julian's parents, they gave me a chance, Mrs. Kim explained one morning as they folded laundry together. I had no English, no papers, nothing. But Mrs. Bradford, Julian's mother, she said everyone deserves dignity. She helped me get my citizenship. Paid for English classes. That's where Julian learned kindness. From her. She sounds wonderful, Camille said. She was, Mrs. Kim's eyes grew distant. She died the same year as Julian's wife. It was very hard for him. Lost his mother and his partner in 1 year. But he survived. He had Sophie and Sophie needed him. Just like Isaiah needs you. Camille had started going through her old portfolio, what she'd been able to access online. Julian had given her a laptop, framing it as a loan, though Camille suspected he never expected it back. Looking at her old design work felt strange, like examining artifacts from another life. These are good, Julian said one evening when he'd stopped by to drop off groceries. He'd been looking over her shoulder at the screen. Really good. Have you thought about freelancing while you get back on your feet? I don't have any current contacts, Camille admitted. And my reputation is probably shot. I just disappeared from the industry. No explanation, no notice. Let me make some calls, Julian said. I know people who need design work. Good people who'll pay fairly. Sophie had become Isaiah's devoted guardian. Every day after her school she'd run to the guest house to check on him. She'd read him board books, sing him songs she'd learned in kindergarten, and offer detailed reports to Camille about his development. "He smiled at me today," Sophie announced one afternoon, her face glowing. "A real smile, not a gas smile. Mrs. Kim says there's a difference." "There is," Camille confirmed, touched by the little girl's dedication. "When I grow up, I want to help babies," Sophie said seriously. "Like you do. You take such good care of Isaiah." "It's my job too," Camille said. "And my joy." "But you didn't give up," Sophie said. "Even when things were really, really hard." "That's brave." Out of the mouths of children, Camille thought, hugging the little girl. New Year's Eve arrived, and Julian invited Camille and Isaiah to the main house for celebration. Camille hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but Mrs. Kim wouldn't hear of it. "Family celebrates together," she said firmly. "Your family now." The main house was as beautiful as Camille had imagined. High ceilings, elegant furnishings, but also signs of life everywhere. Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books lay scattered on side tables. Family photos lined the hallway, and Camille found herself pausing at one. A beautiful woman with light brown hair and Julian's same kind eyes held a baby Sophie. Julian stood behind them, his arms around both, his expression full of love and hope. The picture radiated happiness. "That was taken right after we brought Sophie home from the hospital," Julian said softly, appearing beside her. 8 weeks early. She was so small, spent a month in the NICU. But she fought. She's always been a fighter." "Your wife was beautiful," Camille said. "She was," Julian agreed. "Her name was Rachel. She'd have liked you. She always gravitated toward people who'd overcome things. She believed everyone has a story worth hearing." They watched the New Year's countdown on TV, Sophie barely able to keep her eyes open. When midnight struck, Mrs. Kim popped sparkling cider, and they toasted to new beginnings. "To second chances," Julian said, raising his glass. "To kindness," Mrs. Kim added. "To family," Sophie said sleepily. "To hope," Camille finished, feeling the word settle in her chest like a promise. Later, walking back to the guest house under a star-filled sky, Isaiah bundled against her chest, Camille reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. She had shelter. She had safety. She had people who cared whether she and Isaiah were okay. But more than that, she had something she'd lost in those desperate months on the street. She had her sense of self back. She was Camille Johnson, graphic designer, mother, survivor. She was not her circumstances. She was not her failures. She was not Jerome's abandonment or her sister's rejection. She was herself, and that was enough. January brought bitter cold but also unexpected opportunities. Julian had made those calls he'd mentioned, and Camille found herself with her first freelance client in almost a year. It was a small project, designing a logo for a local startup, but it felt monumental. She'd set up a workspace in the guest house's second bedroom. Julian had provided a proper desk and ergonomic chair, along with a professional monitor. "Consider it an investment," he'd said when she'd protested. "In a designer I have faith in." The work came back to her like muscle memory. Choosing fonts, playing with color palettes, refining shapes until they conveyed exactly the right message. She'd forgotten how much she loved it, how creating something beautiful from nothing made her feel complete. Isaiah had his own routine now. He spent mornings with Camille as she worked, napping in a bassinet beside her desk. Afternoons were with Mrs. Kim, who doted on him shamelessly. "I never had grandchildren," she'd confided. "My daughter chose career over family. This is my chance." Sophie continued her daily visits, now helping Camille with simple tasks. She'd sort colored pencils, organize paper samples, and offer opinions on designs with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. "That duck looks funny," Sophie said one afternoon, pointing at Camille's screen. "It's supposed to be a swan," Camille said, trying not to laugh. "Oh." Sophie tilted her head. "Maybe make the neck longer?" She wasn't wrong. Camille adjusted the design, and Sophie beamed with pride. Julian had started joining them for dinner several times a week. Sometimes at the guest house, sometimes at the main house. The conversations flowed easily now, covering everything from politics to Sophie's school projects to Isaiah's latest developmental milestones. "He's tracking objects with his eyes now," Camille said one evening over Mrs. Kim's amazing homemade pasta. "He follows my face when I move." "That's advanced for 4 months," Julian said. "He's clearly brilliant." "Obviously," Camille agreed with a smile. "He takes after his mother." It was a joke, but Julian's expression grew serious. He does. You're one of the smartest, most resilient people I've ever met. Camille felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. Over the past month, she'd grown comfortable with Julian. He was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked her advice on Sophie's education, on business decisions that touched on marketing and design. He treated her as an equal, not a charity case. One late January evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and Mrs. Kim had returned to her own cottage on the estate, Julian and Camille found themselves alone in the guest house living room. Isaiah slept peacefully in his bassinet, and they sat on opposite ends of the couch, each with a cup of tea. "Can I ask you something personal?" Julian said. "Of course." "Do you ever hear from Isaiah's father?" Camille shook her head. "No. I tried reaching out when things first got bad, but his number was disconnected. I think he left Chicago entirely. Maybe that's for the best. Isaiah deserves better than someone who could walk away so easily." "He does," Julian agreed. "But it still has to hurt. Being abandoned like that." "It did," Camille admitted. "For a long time I blamed myself. Thought I should have seen the signs, should have been smarter, should have had a backup plan. But I've realized that his leaving wasn't about my worth. It was about his weakness." "That's very wise." "Therapy helps," Camille said with a small smile. Beth Rodriguez had connected her with a counselor who specialized in trauma and homelessness. The weekly sessions held via video call had been transformative. "I'm learning that I can't control other people's choices. I can only control my response." "I should probably take that advice," Julian said softly. "I still struggle with Rachel's death. Wondering if I missed signs, if I could have gotten her to the doctor sooner, if different treatments might have worked." "You can't think like that," Camille said gently. "Cancer doesn't care about what-ifs." "I know. Logically, I know. But grief isn't logical." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire in the fireplace. Finally, Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs in the main house, visible through the window, waving at them. "She's supposed to be asleep," Julian said, but there was no real frustration in his voice. "She wanted to say good night," Camille guessed. Sophie opened the window a crack. "Good night, Camille." "Good night, Isaiah." "Daddy, can Camille and Isaiah stay forever?" Julian looked at Camille, something shifting in his expression. "That's up to Camille, sweetheart." "I vote yes," Sophie called before closing the window and disappearing. "She's gotten very attached," Julian said. "So have I," Camille admitted. "To all of you. I know this is temporary, that eventually I need to find my own place. But I'm grateful for every day here." "What if it didn't have to be temporary?" Julian asked suddenly. "What if this could be permanent?" Camille's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean the guest house is yours as long as you want it. I'm not asking you to leave. Ever. You and Isaiah, you've become part of our family. Sophie lights up when you're around. Mrs. Kim has someone to fuss over again. And I." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I enjoy your company. Very much." "Julian, I can't just." "Why not?" he asked. "You're working now. You're building your career back. But Chicago's expensive. Why spend money on rent somewhere else when you could stay here, save money, build real security? It's practical." Camille studied his face, seeing sincerity there but also something else. Something that made her pulse quicken. "Is it just practical?" she asked softly. Julian held her gaze. "No, it's not. But I don't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. You've been through enough. So I'm framing it as practical, giving you an out if you need one." "I don't need an out," Camille heard herself say. "I enjoy your company very much too." The smile that spread across Julian's face was worth everything. "Good. Then it's settled. You're staying. Permanently." If Camille's journey is touching your heart, imagine how many others need their story heard. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment of hope, and comment to share what this story means to you. Your engagement helps stories of kindness reach the people who need them most. That night, lying in bed with Isaiah beside her, Camille thought about permanence. About how temporary had always been her reality. Temporary homes, temporary jobs, temporary relationships. But maybe, just maybe, this could be different. Maybe this could be the foundation she'd always dreamed of building. Spring arrived suddenly in early March, melting the snow and coaxing the estate's gardens back to life. Mrs. Kim recruited Camille to help with planting, teaching her about perennials and annuals while Isaiah napped in a portable crib under the shade of an old oak tree. "You have good instincts," Mrs. Kim said as Camille carefully positioned tulip bulbs. "Plants need patience and attention. Like children. Like life." Camille had secured 3 more clients by now. Word was spreading quietly through Julian's professional network about the talented designer working from Lake Forest. She'd even raised her rates, Beth's encouragement ringing in her ears. Know your worth. Money was accumulating in her new bank account. Not a fortune but a cushion. Security. The ability to buy Isaiah clothes without worrying about whether she could afford diapers. Small freedoms that felt immense. Sophie's 6th birthday was approaching, and Julian had asked Camille to help plan the party. Rachel always went all out, he'd explained. Princess themes, elaborate cakes, the works. But I'm not good at this stuff. Sophie wants something special, and I don't want to disappoint her. What does Sophie want? Camille asked. That evening they'd sat down with Sophie over hot chocolate. I want a garden party, Sophie announced. With flowers and butterflies and all my friends. And I want Isaiah to come, obviously. Obviously, Camille agreed solemnly. They'd planned together, the 3 of them, turning Sophie's vision into reality. Camille designed invitations with watercolor butterflies. Mrs. Kim agreed to make a flower-shaped cake. Julian handled logistics, renting tables and a small tent in case of rain. You're good at this, Julian told Camille one evening as they assembled party favors, small packets of wildflower seeds tied with ribbon. I love events, Camille admitted. In my old life, before Isaiah, I sometimes did design work for event planners. It was fun seeing my ideas come to life. You could do that again, Julian said. Branch out beyond logo work. There's real money in event branding. Maybe, Camille said thoughtfully. Once I'm more established. The party was a perfect success. 15 kindergartners ran through the gardens, hunting for the butterfly stickers Camille had hidden. They ate Mrs. Kim's magnificent cake, played games, and shrieked with delight. Sophie glowed with happiness, and watching her, Camille felt a surge of affection so strong it surprised her. She loved this child. Loved her fierce compassion, her innocent wisdom, her generous heart. Sophie had given Camille and Isaiah a future by simply refusing to walk past them that cold Christmas Eve. How did you repay something like that? Best party ever, Sophie declared at the end, hugging Camille tightly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're welcome, sweet girl. Later, after the guests had left and Sophie was in bed, Julian and Camille cleaned up together, working in easy companionship. She talks about you constantly at school, Julian said, collecting discarded paper plates. Camille this, Camille that. Her teacher asked if you were a family member. What did you say? Camille asked. I said you were family, Julian replied simply. Because you are. Isaiah's 1st birthday arrived in early April. Camille had been planning something small, just the estate family, but Mrs. Kim wouldn't hear of it. 1st birthday is important, she insisted. We celebrate big. So they did. Mrs. Kim made a traditional Korean 1st birthday table, explaining the significance of each item. We put objects in front of the baby, she said. Whatever he reaches for predicts his future. Thread means long life. Money means wealth. Books mean intelligence. They'd set up the table in the guest house, inviting not just the estate family but also Beth Rodriguez and Dr. Chen, who'd both become friends over the past months. Isaiah, wearing a little blue suit that made Camille's heart melt, sat in his high chair and looked at the array of objects with serious concentration. He reached for the book. Smart boy, Mrs. Kim said approvingly. Just like his mama. They'd cut a small cake and Isaiah had smeared frosting everywhere, laughing with pure joy. Watching him, healthy and happy and so different from the blue-lipped baby in the doorway 5 months ago, Camille couldn't stop the tears. Happy tears, she assured Julian, who'd immediately looked concerned. I know, he said softly. But still, let me get you a tissue. That night, after everyone had left and Isaiah was asleep, Camille stood at the guest house window, looking out at the gardens now in full spring bloom. A soft knock announced Julian's arrival. I have something for you, he said, holding out an envelope. Inside was a check. A large check. And a letter from one of Julian's business associates, offering her a contract position designing marketing materials. 6 months guaranteed work, excellent pay, potential for extension. Julian, this is too much, Camille whispered. It's not from me, Julian said. Not directly. I made an introduction, yes. But Thomas looked at your portfolio and made his own decision. You earned this, Camille. Your talent earned it. She looked at the check again, at the number that represented true financial stability. The ability to save, to plan, to build a real future. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take it, Julian encouraged. Say you'll keep building your career. Say you'll let yourself succeed. I'll take it, Camille said. Then, impulsively, she hugged him. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when no one else would. Julian's arms came around her, warm and solid. I'll always see you, Camille. Always. When she pulled back, something had changed in the air between them. Julian's eyes held questions, hopes, possibilities. Camille felt them echoed in her own chest. But neither spoke of it. Not yet. The moment was too new, too fragile. Instead, they simply smiled at each other, and that was enough. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in May. Camille was working on designs for Thomas's company, Isaiah playing with blocks at her feet, when the notification popped up. The sender's name made her freeze. Courtney Johnson. Her sister. Camille stared at the screen, her heart racing. She hadn't heard from Courtney in over a year, not since that desperate phone call when she'd begged for help and been refused. What could her sister possibly want now? Her hand trembled as she clicked open the message. Camille, I heard through mutual friends that you're doing well. I'm glad. I know things were bad between us, but you're still my sister. I'd like to talk. Can we meet? Courtney. Short. Almost businesslike. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a request to meet, as if the past year hadn't been filled with judgment and rejection. Camille felt anger rise hot in her throat. She wanted to delete the email, to block her sister, to pretend she'd never seen it. But something stopped her. Some small voice asking, what if? She called Julian. He'd become her sounding board for difficult decisions, his calm logic balancing her emotional reactions. What do you want to do? He asked after she'd read him the email. I want to ignore it, Camille admitted. But I also want to know what she has to say. Does that make me weak? It makes you human, Julian said gently. And hopeful. There's nothing weak about hoping for reconciliation. What if she just wants to judge me again? To say I told you so? Then you walk away, Julian said. But Camille, you're not the same person you were when you called her last year. You're not desperate or broken. You're strong and successful and surrounded by people who love you. She can't hurt you anymore unless you let her. His words settled something in Camille's chest. He was right. She wasn't that terrified woman in the doorway anymore. She'd survived. She'd rebuilt. She had nothing to prove. She agreed to meet Courtney at a coffee shop in downtown Lake Forest the following Saturday. Julian offered to watch Isaiah, and Mrs. Kim promised to make Camille's favorite Korean comfort food for when she got back. No matter what happens, Mrs. Kim said firmly, you come home to people who love you. Camille walked into the coffee shop with her head high. She wore a beautiful green dress she'd bought with her first paycheck from Thomas, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. She looked successful because she was successful. She looked happy because she was happy. Courtney was already there, seated at a corner table. She looked older than Camille remembered, harder somehow. Her business suit was expensive, her makeup perfect, but her eyes held something Camille couldn't quite identify. Hi, Courtney said as Camille approached. You look good. Thank you, Camille said, sitting down. You too. They ordered coffee, making small talk about the weather, the neighborhood. Finally, Courtney got to the point. I heard you're staying at the Bradford estate, she said. That you're working for Julian Bradford's company. Not his company, Camille corrected. One of his business associates. I'm a freelance designer. But you met through Julian, Courtney pressed. He took you in. Gave you a place to live. Camille felt defensive walls rising. He helped me when I needed help. Yes. I'm not judging, Courtney said quickly. I'm trying to understand. When you called me last year, you were living on the streets. Now you're living on an estate. That's quite a change. It is, Camille agreed. Because someone showed me kindness when you wouldn't. Courtney flinched. That's fair. And that's why I asked you here. To apologize. Camille hadn't expected that. What? I was wrong, Courtney said, her voice dropping. When you called me when you needed help, I was wrong to turn you away. I told myself I was teaching you a lesson about making better choices. But really I was just scared. Scared of what? Of ending up like you, Courtney admitted. I've built this perfect life, this perfect career. Fancy condo, corporate job, everything I thought I wanted. But it's lonely. And watching you struggle, seeing you make what I thought were mistakes, it terrified me. Because what if I made mistakes too? What if my perfect life fell apart? Camille studied her sister's face, seeing genuine regret there. So you cut me off to protect yourself. Yes, Courtney whispered. And I'm so sorry. I should have helped. I should have been there. You're my little sister and I failed you. The anger Camille had carried for so long started to loosen. Not disappear, not entirely. But loosen. Do you know what it was like? Being on the streets with a baby? Being so scared every night that I wouldn't wake up, that Isaiah wouldn't wake up? I can't imagine, Courtney said, tears in her eyes now. I almost gave up, Camille continued. So many times. But I kept going for Isaiah. And then Julian and Sophie found us. They saved us. Not because they had to, but because they saw us as human beings worth saving. I should have seen that too, Courtney said. They talked for another hour. Courtney explained her own struggles, the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, the fear that had driven her decisions. Camille shared her journey, the terror and hope, the rebuilding and growth. Can you forgive me? Courtney finally asked. Camille thought about Julian's words. About how she was strong now, surrounded by love. About how forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or condoning. It meant releasing the weight of anger and moving forward. I can, Camille said slowly. But I need you to understand something. The people at the estate, they're my family now. They showed up when you didn't. So if you want to be in my life, you have to respect that. I do, Courtney said quickly. I want to meet Isaiah. I want to get to know you again. I want to be the sister I should have been. Then we can try, Camille said. Slowly. With boundaries. But we can try. When Camille returned to the estate, she found Julian, Sophie, and Mrs. Kim waiting anxiously in the guest house. Isaiah was asleep in his playpen, and the smell of Mrs. Kim's cooking filled the air. How did it go? Julian asked immediately. Camille sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. She apologized. She wants to rebuild our relationship. And? Julian prompted gently. And I said we could try, Camille said. I'm not sure I trust her completely yet. But I think forgiveness is worth attempting. Julian sat beside her, taking her hand. That's very brave. Or very stupid, Camille said with a weak laugh. Brave, Julian repeated firmly. Forgiveness takes more strength than holding grudges. I'm proud of you. Mrs. Kim brought over steaming bowls of kimchi stew, and Sophie curled up next to Camille, leaning her head on her shoulder. Did your sister say sorry? Sophie asked. She did. Good, Sophie said simply. Everyone deserves second chances. That's what Daddy says. Camille looked at Julian over Sophie's head, seeing warmth and admiration in his eyes. Your daddy is very wise. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Camille held Isaiah close and thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about how the people who'd shown her the most grace were the ones she'd least expected. A billionaire CEO and his daughter. A housekeeper from Korea. A social worker and a doctor who'd treated her with dignity. And maybe now, a sister trying to make amends. Life was strange and beautiful and complicated. But sitting there in the peaceful guest house, her son healthy and safe in her arms, Camille realized something profound. She was no longer just surviving. She was healing. And healing meant having the strength to extend the same grace to others that had been extended to her. Summer arrived in a burst of heat and sunshine. The estate gardens exploded with color, and Sophie spent her days running through them with Isaiah toddling behind, his chubby legs finally strong enough to support him. Watching them play together, hearing their laughter, Camille felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. Her design business had grown beyond anything she'd dreamed. Thomas's contract had led to referrals, and suddenly, Camille had more work than she could handle. She'd hired an assistant, a recent design school graduate named Amara Washington who was hungry and talented. You're building an empire, Julian teased one evening as they watched the children play from the patio. Hardly, Camille laughed. But I am building something real. Something stable. You deserve it, Julian said, his tone serious now. After everything you've been through, you deserve every good thing. Courtney had been coming to visit regularly, tentatively rebuilding their relationship. She'd brought gifts for Isaiah, had coffee with Camille weekly, and was making genuine efforts to understand her sister's life. It wasn't perfect and trust was still fragile, but it was progress. One particularly hot July afternoon, Julian asked Camille to come to his office in the main house. She'd been there a few times before, but usually just to drop off paperwork or discuss Sophie's schedule. This felt different. More formal. Is everything okay? She asked as she sat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Everything's fine, Julian assured her. Better than fine. I have a proposition for you. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a detailed proposal for a new position. Director of Creative Design at Bradford Industries. The salary made Camille's eyes widen. The benefits were comprehensive. And the position was permanent. I don't understand, Camille said slowly. I'm not qualified for this. You absolutely are, Julian countered. You've proven yourself over and over. Your work is exceptional. Your client retention rate is perfect. And you understand brand identity in a way most corporate designers don't. I need someone like you on my team. Julian, I can't just. Why not? He asked, echoing his words from months ago. Why can't you accept that you're talented and valuable and worthy of this opportunity? Camille stared at the proposal, her mind racing. This wasn't charity. Julian had shown her the market research, the gap in his company's marketing department, the need for someone with her specific skill set. This was a legitimate offer based on merit. What about my freelance clients? She asked. Keep them if you want, Julian said. Or transition them to Amara. It's your choice. But Camille, this is a chance to build something permanent. Security for you and Isaiah. A career with growth potential. Benefits, retirement, stability. Everything she'd lost when she'd been fired while pregnant. Everything she'd thought she'd never have again. I need time to think, Camille said. Of course, Julian agreed. But for what it's worth, I really hope you say yes. Not just because you're talented, though you are. But because I want you around. Permanently. There was weight in those last words, something unspoken but deeply felt. Camille met his eyes and saw it reflected there, the same feeling that had been growing in her chest for months. She said yes 3 days later, accepting the position with gratitude and excitement. Her first day at Bradford Industries was surreal. She had an office with windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. She had a team. She had business cards with her name and title embossed in elegant font. Mrs. Kim had cried when Camille had shown her the office via video call. This is what happens when you don't give up, the older woman said fiercely. This is what happens when you believe in yourself. The work was challenging but rewarding. Camille found herself energized by the creative problems, by the collaboration with other departments, by the tangible impact of her designs on Bradford Industries' brand recognition. She was good at this. Really good. Sophie had started first grade and would come home bursting with stories about her day. She'd started calling Camille by her name now instead of Miss Camille, a shift that felt significant. Can we do homework together? Sophie asked one afternoon, spreading her books across the guest house dining table. Of course, Camille said, setting Isaiah up with his toys nearby. They worked in comfortable silence, Sophie practicing her letters while Camille reviewed brand guidelines on her laptop. It felt domestic and warm and right. Camille? Sophie said after a while. Yes, sweetie? Do you think you'll stay here forever? Like really forever? Camille looked at the child who'd saved her life, whose compassion and courage had changed everything. I hope so. Would you like that? Very much, Sophie said solemnly. You're my best friend. And Isaiah is like my little brother. And Daddy is happy when you're around. He smiles more. He does. Camille asked, her heart skipping. Well, he used to be sad a lot. After Mommy died. But now he laughs and jokes and seems like he's not thinking sad thoughts all the time. I think it's because of you. Sophie returned to her homework, oblivious to the emotional earthquake she just triggered. Camille sat frozen, processing the child's words. Julian was happy because of her. He smiled more because of her. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and Mrs. Kim had retired to her cottage, Julian came to the guest house. He did that often now, stopping by after work to talk about their days, to laugh over Sophie's latest pronouncement, to simply be in each other's company. Sophie said something interesting today, Camille said as they sat on the patio watching fireflies dance through the garden. Only one thing? Julian teased. She usually says a dozen interesting things. She said you're happier now. That I make you smile more. Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. She's not wrong. You do make me happy, Camille. You and Isaiah, you've brought life back into this house. Into me. Julian. I know we should probably talk about this, he continued. About what's happening between us. But I don't want to rush you or pressure you. You've been through so much. You're finally stable and secure. I don't want to complicate that. Camille turned to face him fully. What if I want complicated? What if I want to talk about this? Hope flared in Julian's eyes. Then I'd say I've fallen for you. Completely. Not because you needed saving but because of who you are. Your strength, your creativity, your grace. The way you love Isaiah, the way you care for Sophie. I love you, Camille. The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and exactly what Camille had been feeling but couldn't quite name. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a while now. But I was scared. Scared this wasn't real, Scared I was imagining it, scared I'd mess it up. You won't, Julian said gently. We won't. We'll figure it out together. If you want to. I want to, Camille said, and then Julian was kissing her softly, sweetly, and it felt like coming home. Fall painted the estate in shades of gold and crimson. Camille had been at Bradford Industries for 3 months now, and her department was thriving. The marketing campaigns she designed had increased brand recognition by 40%. Julian had presented her with a bonus and a glowing review. But more than professional success, Camille had found personal happiness. She and Julian had been officially together since that summer evening, though they'd kept it quiet, wanting to make sure Sophie was comfortable with the shift in their relationship. They needn't have worried. Sophie had figured it out almost immediately. Are you and Daddy dating? She'd asked Camille bluntly one morning over breakfast. Yes, Camille had answered honestly. Is that okay with you? Sophie had considered this seriously. Does that mean you'll stay forever for real? I hope so. Then it's very okay, Sophie had declared, returning to her cereal with satisfaction. Isaiah was walking confidently now, chattering in his own language, and had developed a serious attachment to Sophie. He followed her everywhere, calling her Zoe, which melted everyone's hearts. Courtney had become a regular fixture in their lives, her apologies translating into actions. She'd helped Camille with childcare when needed, had taken Sophie shopping for school supplies, and was genuinely trying to be the sister she should have been from the start. I'm proud of you, Courtney had said recently. Not just for what you've built professionally but for how you've handled everything. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I'm stronger than I gave myself credit for, Camille had replied. As November approached, marking nearly a year since that fateful Christmas Eve, Julian had become increasingly preoccupied with something. He'd make phone calls in private, disappear for mysterious meetings, and generally seemed to be planning something big. Mrs. Kim knew what it was and refused to tell, giving Camille knowing looks that only increased her curiosity. On a crisp Saturday in late November, Julian announced a family outing. They were going to downtown Chicago, to the exact block where he and Sophie had found Camille and Isaiah. Why? Camille asked, confused. You'll see, was all Julian would say. The drive into the city was filled with Sophie's chatter and Isaiah's babbling. When they arrived at the familiar street, Camille felt a wave of emotion. The bookstore doorway where she'd huddled with Isaiah looked different now, no longer a symbol of desperation but a reminder of how far she'd come. Julian had arranged for them to have dinner at an upscale restaurant across the street, with a window table overlooking the exact spot where their lives had intersected. This is where everything changed, Julian said as they settled into their seats. Sophie was practically vibrating with excitement, clearly in on whatever was happening. Mrs. Kim had taken Isaiah for a special grandma night, so it was just the three of them. It is, Camille agreed, looking out at the doorway. I think about that night all the time. How cold it was. How scared I was. How you stopped when everyone else kept walking. Sophie stopped, Julian corrected. I just followed her lead. We're a team, Sophie said importantly. After dinner, Julian suggested a walk. It was cold again, winter returning, but nothing like that brutal Christmas Eve. They walked to the bookstore doorway, and Julian pulled Camille to a stop right where she'd been sitting that night. A year ago you were here, he said softly. Scared and desperate and doing everything you could to protect your son. I was walking past, carrying shopping bags full of things that didn't matter, thinking about how to get through another Christmas without Rachel. Julian. Camille started, but he gently touched her lips. Sophie saw you. She saw Isaiah. And she refused to let me walk past. She insisted we stop, that we help. And in that moment she saved you. But Camille, you saved us too. Tears were streaming down Camille's face now. You brought life back into our house, Julian continued. You reminded me what it means to be fully alive, to hope, to love. You showed Sophie what real strength looks like. You've become my best friend, my partner, the person I want to share every day with. He knelt down on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Sophie bounced on her toes beside him, barely containing her excitement. Camille Johnson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Sophie's mom, and let me be Isaiah's father? Will you build a forever family with us? Camille looked down at this incredible man who'd shown her kindness when she'd needed it most, who'd seen her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. She looked at Sophie, whose compassion had started everything. She thought about Isaiah, safe and loved and thriving. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you. All of you. Julian slipped the ring on her finger, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, and stood to kiss her. Sophie crashed into them both, wrapping her arms around their legs. "We're going to be a real family," Sophie shouted. "A forever family." People walking past smiled at the scene. Some probably recognized the spot, remembered the homeless woman who used to sit there. Maybe they were glad to see she'd found her way. Or maybe they just saw what Camille saw. A family, imperfect and blended and absolutely right, standing in the exact spot where grace had transformed tragedy into hope. Christmas Eve arrived again, the estate transformed into a winter wonderland. Mrs. Kim had outdone herself with decorations, and the main house glowed with lights and warmth. Camille stood at the window of what was now officially their home, the guest house transformed from temporary shelter to permanent residence, watching snow fall softly on the gardens. The wedding was planned for spring, a small ceremony on the estate with close friends and family. Courtney would be Camille's maid of honor, a symbol of forgiveness and new beginnings. Sophie would be the flower girl, a role she took very seriously. Isaiah would carry the rings, though at barely 2 years old, his job would really be to look cute. But tonight wasn't about the wedding. Tonight was about remembering and honoring the journey that had brought them here. Julian came up behind Camille, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready?" "Ready," she confirmed. They'd made a tradition of it, something Camille had insisted on. Every Christmas Eve, the Bradford family would volunteer at the homeless shelter downtown, serving meals and distributing warm clothes. It was important to Camille that Sophie and Isaiah grow up understanding how fragile security could be, how important compassion was. The shelter was packed, families and individuals seeking warmth and food. Camille recognized some faces from her own time on the streets, though she'd been too scared to come inside back then, worried they'd separate her from Isaiah. "Camille?" a voice called out. She turned to see Marie, a woman she'd met at the food bank during those desperate months. Marie's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh my God, you made it. You really made it." They hugged tightly. "I did," Camille said. "And you? How are you?" "Getting there," Marie said. "Got into transitional housing last month. Starting a job next week. It's slow but it's progress." Camille pulled out a business card. "Email me. I might have some design work you could help with." "Paid work." Marie's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that." "Someone did it for me," Camille said simply. "Now I'm passing it on." They worked for hours, Julian and Camille side by side, serving food, sorting donations, listening to stories. Sophie helped in the children's area, reading books to little ones while Isaiah played nearby. Mrs. Kim held court in the kitchen, teaching volunteers her efficient meal prep techniques. As midnight approached, Julian gathered their family together outside the shelter. Sophie held Isaiah's hand, both children bundled in warm coats, their breath making clouds in the cold air. "1 year ago tonight," Julian said, looking at each of them, "we found each other." Sophie's compassion led us to Camille and Isaiah. And that moment of grace changed everything. "It saved us," Camille added, pulling Sophie close. "Your beautiful heart saved us, sweet girl." "But you made us whole again," Sophie said, her words surprisingly mature. "Our family was broken after Mommy died. And then you came and we weren't broken anymore." They stood together in the falling snow, watching the shelter's lights glow warmly. Inside, people who'd lost hope were finding moments of peace. Bellies would be full tonight. Bodies would be warm. And maybe, just maybe, someone inside would have their own chance encounter, their own Sophie stopping to help. "What do you think about next year?" Julian asked Camille as they drove home later, the children asleep in the back. "What about it?" "I was thinking we could expand our Christmas Eve tradition. Maybe create a fund to help people in your situation. Single mothers with young children who fall through the system's cracks." Camille felt warmth spread through her chest. "The Camille Johnson Foundation?" "The Bradford Family Foundation," Julian corrected gently. "This is something we do together. All of us." "I love that idea," Camille said. "I love you." "I love you too," Julian replied. All the way back to that doorway. Back at the estate, they carried the sleeping children inside. Isaiah went to his nursery, beautifully decorated now with murals Camille had painted herself. Sophie went to her room in the main house, though she'd already lobbied hard for them all to live together after the wedding. Alone in their living room, Camille and Julian sat by the fireplace, watching flames dance and cast shadows on the walls. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd walked past?" Julian asked. "I try not to," Camille admitted. "But I know it wouldn't have ended well." Isaiah was so close to serious hypothermia. Another few hours. "But we didn't walk past," Julian said firmly. Sophie stopped us. And look at what we built from that moment. Camille looked around at the beautiful home, thought about her thriving career, about the family they'd created from broken pieces. She thought about Sophie's compassion, about Mrs. Kim's wisdom, about Julian's steadfast support. She thought about her own strength, proven through fire. I used to think I needed saving, Camille said softly. And I did in that moment. But what I really needed was someone to see me. To remind me I was worth seeing. You gave me that. You, Sophie, Mrs. Kim, everyone. You gave me back my sense of worth. You always had worth, Julian said. We just had the privilege of witnessing it. Later, as Camille lay in bed, Isaiah's baby monitor softly transmitting his peaceful breathing, she thought about the journey from that doorway to this moment. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if happiness this profound could really last. But it had lasted. And it would continue lasting because it was built on something real. Not on charity or pity, but on mutual respect, genuine love, and the understanding that helping others didn't diminish you. It expanded you. The snow continued falling outside, blanketing the estate in white. Somewhere in the city, in doorways and under bridges, people were struggling to survive the night. Camille sent up a prayer for them, a wish that they'd find their own Sophie, their own moment of grace. And she made a promise to herself, she would be that grace for others. She would stop when others walked past. She would see people when the world looked away. She would remember where she'd been and use that memory to light the way for others. Because kindness, hope, and love weren't just pretty words. They were actions. They were choices made every day in big moments and small ones. They were what saved people. What saved families. What saved the world, one compassionate act at a time. As Camille drifted off to sleep, Julian's arm around her, she smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to choose kindness over indifference. But tonight, on this Christmas Eve, 1 year after her life had been saved by a billionaire CEO and his compassionate daughter, Camille Johnson was exactly where she belonged.